moving forward. We will not retreat. We will never give up. We are in a race to the finish line, and we shall prevail. Thank you. Nashukuru sana.
Good morning. Buenas tardes. Boa noite. Welcome to the United Nations Population Fund series of global conversations on the International Conference on Population Development and the Nairobi Commitments. I'm Linda Goler-Blount, President and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, and I have the honor and privilege of moderating today's conversation. Once again, we shall overcome COVID-19 and people of African descent. Many of us know We Shall Overcome as a song of protest, first sung in the 40s by striking tobacco workers in South Carolina, and then later during the US Civil Rights Movement of the 60s, as Black people fighting for their civil rights faced water cannons, vicious dogs, and angry policemen. The US Library of Congress calls We Shall Overcome the most important and powerful song of the 20th century. Racism has been pandemic throughout the colonized world. Women of African descent have been oppressed for hundreds of years, and here we are struggling with two global pandemics, COVID-19 and the fury caused by the brutal murder of George Floyd and too many others because of racist policing. Right now, women of African descent live at the intersection of racism, gender discrimination, and now COVID-19. Black people in the US found themselves newly classified as essential workers. In urban areas, they must ride public transportation and work the kinds of jobs that bring them face to face with an often unmasked and angry public. And in other countries, people of African descent must also put themselves in harm's way, exposed to COVID-19 because of, as with the US, questionable and unscientific responses to this public health crisis. Today, our panel will discuss the road from colonialism, the state of racial injustice, and the need for activism, and how we can achieve justice in the time of COVID-19. We Shall Overcome has 7 stanzas. They speak of strength, victory, courage, truth, and peace. I hope in our conversation today, we begin to write the 8th and final stanza of this powerful song. Justice. We have a formidable panel of conversants today, and after our keynote speakers, I'll ask each panelist for his or her perspective on a question, and then I'll ask panelists to offer a vision for the future. But let's begin with a brief introduction of our speakers. Dr. Natalia Kanem is our esteemed host today. Dr. Kanem is a physician and the executive director of the United Nations Population Fund. She is the first Latin American to hold this role. Dr. Kanem. First Vice President of the Republic of Costa Rica, Epsi Campbell-Barr is the first woman of African descent to become Vice President of Costa Rica. His Excellency, Dr. Walton A. Webson, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations. Shoneda Lowe, founder of the Youth Committee of the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly, Guyana Secretariat. Dr. Ahmed Reed is Associate Professor of Caribbean History, City University of New York. Dr. Alexandra da Silva is a member of the Racism and Health Working Group of the Brazilian Association of Collective Health. Mr. Mark Johnson is a Grammy Award-winning producer and award-winning film director. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Mervyn Taylor is a professor, teacher, and author of several books of poetry. So Mr. Taylor, I have the pleasure of starting with you. You hail from Belmont, Trinidad and Tobago, and now you live in Brooklyn. You're a renowned You're a renowned
Yeah.
poet. You've taught at New York City, the New School University, and public schools. You're the author of several books of poetry, including No Back Door and Voices Carry. And you even read your poetry accompanied by the bassist David Williams on the CD Road Clear. I lived down the street a bit from you a few years ago in Port of Spain in the 90s. And my children actually attended Bishop's Junior. And your poems remind me of a time that when they were encouraged and affirmed by their teachers, in stark contrast to what they experienced when we came back to the US. So thank you for your voice. And Mr. Taylor, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Natalia, Dr. Kanem, for the invitation to be part of this wonderful event. It's interesting that during this time of COVID-19, this pandemic, the kinds of reactions by the people who are supposed to be leaders, who are supposed to be powerful and able to push back against enemies. The problem with this pandemic, with COVID-19, is that it's not the normal kind of enemy, right? It's much more subtle, much more insidious, so that the powers that be, they can bring out their big guns, but it doesn't work against this kind of enemy. So while I've been here, locked down, as they say in Trinidad, I'm happy to be here, as a matter of fact. I've been having poems come to me almost unbidden, and trying to make sense of this whole experience. We're still sort of in doubt. Nobody has come up with a really strong answer to what's going on. But it occurs to me that women have been much more successful in handling things that are subtle, enemies that don't walk and make a shadow, that women somehow are able to intuitively respond to things. And in between, in these poems that have come to me since I've been here, as a matter of fact, there's a whole chapbook of poems that have come out of this experience. One of the thoughts I had is that women need to be paid attention to in terms of how they handle their families and how they deal with, and not so much women, powerful women, but the most ordinary women, housewives and so on. We need to have a chat with them about what they think regarding this pandemic. They have their own solutions and their own recipes for health. So one of the women who came to mind is a woman named Lita, who is an old friend of mine. And it's ironic that she worked for a long time in one of the hospitals in Brooklyn, Maimonides, as a wards maid. She's not terribly educated in terms of formal education, but a wiser woman I have never known. She managed her family well and continues to manage them to this day when they come upon difficult times. So this poem came almost all on its own, a poem called News of the Living. And it's dedicated to her, the memory, well, not the memory of her because she's still around, but I'm just wondering in our isolation, I had no idea how she's coping or where she is at this moment. But Lita came up in this poem as a figure who we should pay homage to in terms of how she handles crises and how she's handled them before and how she just might be. And so I try to imagine how she was dealing with this epidemic that we're facing right now. So here's the poem, News of the Living, dedicated to Lita Ramuta. News of the Living. Where's Lita, that I may greet and hug her, her arms, her face white with flour? She's been baking all day to help her son with the business. Is the shop flourishing? The autistic grandchild doing well? I can't think whom else to inquire after, except Dudley, who long ago retired into himself, drew the covers up to his chin as if he knew this day was coming. Ah, Lita, I know you're holding them all above water, while the floodgates of this virus open all around us. You'll convert your house into boat, kitchen into galley, beds into rafts, blowing into the sails till your air runs out, and then fanning with your apron, fanning.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, very much.
You're welcome.
And now it's my extreme pleasure to introduce our host and convener for the conversation today, Dr. Natalia Kanem, Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund. I met Dr. Kanem face-to-face for the first time at the Nairobi Summit last year, but her connections with my organization go back a long way. Dr. Kanem sat on our board of directors some 10 years ago, but even more important than that, she's a very close friend of our founder, Billy Avery. I can tell you there is no more sublime experience than to be in the presence of a leader and a lioness and hear their vision for the future. Dr. Kanem is a physician, public health expert, grant maker, philanthropist, and global citizen. And there is no more ardent supporter or fearless fighter for the health and rights of women of African descent. The New York Times heralded Dr. Kanem as the voice of voices for women's reproductive rights. This is so true, and I'm so proud to be able to call Dr. Natalia Kanem my friend. Dr. Kanem, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Linda Goler-Blount, for that wonderful introduction in the comments about that hymn, We Shall Overcome. I'm also really lucky that you agreed to moderate our discussion today. Excelentísima señora Epsi Campbell Barr, bienvenida y muchísimas gracias, agradecemos. Ambassador Webson, the chair of our executive board, our board president, we are so honored that you are with us for this really important session. And I just want to start with thanking you, Mervyn. Once again, you've brought the words that touch hearts, but also remind us that wherever we are, there we are, we're home.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your beautiful words today. I'm happy to be here. I've been excited about being with the fantastic panelists that we have in store, and also with all of you from all over the world who are joining at all hours for this family conversation that's very timely and much needed. Bienvenidos a todos. Bienvenue, bienvenue. We're so happy that you're here. UNFPA has already made our promises and pledges. We committed at the Nairobi Summit in November last year. No dejemos a nadie atrás. We will leave no one behind. So to keep that promise and make good on it and leave no one behind, for me, means celebrating the joys of coming from a people with a history of resilience, with a history of mutual concern and an appreciation for beauty. As Black people, we walk with that confidence. We have that sense of ourselves as creators of a positive culture across all ages and all stages of life. And truly, to make that home beautiful, whether it's flowers or a kind word, makes a big difference to the soul, no matter what the odds may be stacked against us in the various corners of the world. So, my dear people, sisters, brothers, all friends, I'm addressing you at a time when, once again, Black people have had to rise up and denounce the racism, the brutality. We're here today with a purpose, and that purpose is to ensure that we rise and we overcome the challenge of the viral pandemic, which has burst open the reality of exclusion and discrimination and marginalization and racially motivated violence for too many people of African descent everywhere. There's a heavy impact from years and centuries of inequality. We see that differential impact when we look at the barriers now to healthcare and to education, the systemic racism of discriminatory public policies, and the marginalization, which only add to the heavy impact of COVID as a virus on communities of African descent. Women and girls, yes, we face intersecting forms of discrimination, and that makes the burden even heavier. In the Americas, Afrodescendiente women and girls tend to work in the informal labor market, and it's that type of casual labor that does not come with benefits. The type of poverty wage that leaves such women and girls economically vulnerable, limits their access to social protections, and with less access to things like modern contraceptives and other decent sexual and reproductive health services. Afrodescendiente women and girls are 2 to 3 times more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth from preventable complications. Sexual and reproductive health concerns are vitally important to our community, and shamefully, women and girls more vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence, we are overcounted in that camp. Vulnerable to femicide, which is murder of a woman, sexual exploitation, trafficking, rape, early marriage. These are things that can't be swept under the carpet anymore and have to come into the light to be discussed and dealt with and dissolved. In Latin America and the Caribbean, teen pregnancy, illiteracy, and secondary school dropout rates for rural girls of African descent are very high. And we see this region, Latin America and the Caribbean, shifting now to become the new epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, with 40% of the global cases daily, right? And who among us is being hardest hit? Yes, it is the region's large population of Afro-descendants, infected in higher numbers, and dying in higher numbers, and suffering from disproportionate social and economic effects, as are indigenous peoples. The so-called lockdowns, preventing families from earning an income, women who can be trapped at home in an abusive situation, and children without access to the internet and computers, they're missing school, and older persons are especially vulnerable when living alone. Many of you know that our mamacita is 99 years old. So this pandemic and the threat to her well-being is constantly on our minds. But you know, some of the damage we don't even really see. We don't see it because we're missing the rigorous data that are required. And that data must be disaggregated according to race, so as not to disguise the higher levels of impact for African descendant communities. The United Nations now, under the leadership of our Secretary General Antonio Guterres, has recommitted to assist countries to dismantle racism as part of leaving no one behind. The International Conference on Population and Development and its program of action, the Sustainable Development Goals, and our work. Now we're halfway through this decade, the International Decade of People of African Descent. These are the roadmap that we need. And what we want to see now is action. Our intention now in sitting here together today is to activate strong partnerships all across the board for transformative change. And we want you to be a part of that. I would ask you to use your power that you have within your circles of influence to make clear that you will be a protector of human rights, that you will stand as a promoter of equality and amplify the voices of our sisters and brothers of African descent, including in Africa, and all of humanity. It was Marcus Mosiah Garvey who said, progress is the attraction that moves humanity. That's why we're here today. Il faut se mouvoir. Vamos mudar para melhor. Vamos avanzar. I look forward to this discussion and thank you so much for being a part of it. Muchísimas gracias, obrigada. And back to you, Linda.
Thank you so much. They say sunlight is the greatest disinfectant, so thank you for being that light. And now I'd like to introduce Vice President and Excellency Epsi Campbell-Barr of Costa Rica. I had the privilege of meeting you and listening to your powerful words at the Nairobi Summit last November, and I continue to reflect on them. You've had success containing COVID-19, taking a science-based and human rights-based approach that, frankly, other countries haven't. And as a political leader and an economist, you're able to do what, frankly, so few can, and that is combine science with policy to benefit the population's health and well-being. Poverty in Costa Rica has been reduced to 20%, and by comparison, the Black poverty rate in the US is 22%. The Hispanic rate is 19%. So I want to thank you for your vision and guidance. Your Excellency Epsi Campbell-Barr, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Linda, and good morning, everyone. Bon dia, buenos días. Estoy muy contenta de estar aquí. I would like to thank Natalia Kanem. She is leader of this space to discuss. Saludar también a Mr. Walton Webson, Ambassador and Permanent Resident of Antigua and Barbuda, Mr. Ahmed Reed, Alexander da Silva, and Shonetta Lowe. Primero que todo, quisiera realmente congratular al Fondo de Población por la posibilidad de tener una discusión de este tipo. Natalia, América Latina necesita urgentemente que pongamos estos temas sobre los impactos relacionados con el COVID-19 con la gente, hacia la gente afrodescendiente. Es súper importante que lo miremos en el contexto del decenio de los afrodescendientes, justicia, desarrollo y reconocimiento, pero también que lo miremos en el contexto de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y, por supuesto, en el contexto de la Agenda de Nairobi. Creo que el Fondo de Población ha hecho un aporte extraordinario en materia de derechos y de colocar a los pueblos y comunidades afrodescendientes en el centro del debate. El segundo tema que quisiera plantear es, estamos en tiempos desafiantes, con unas condiciones realmente complejas para el mundo entero, y quisiera hablar en la memoria de Rosario. Rosario Ortiz es una mujer afrodescendiente, líder, que perdió la vida producto del COVID-19. Perdió la vida en Cali, Colombia. No estaban las condiciones que le permitían a ella tener todos los servicios de salud antes de perder su vida. Y como ella, muchísimas mujeres y hombres afrodescendientes, no solo en América Latina, sino que en los Estados Unidos. Pero además porque estamos a 2 días de la conmemoración del Día de las Mujeres Afrodescendientes, afroamericanas, afrolatinoamericanas, afrocaribeñas y de la diáspora. Un día muy importante para las mujeres afrodescendientes, pero también muy importante porque colocamos los temas del rol de las mujeres afrodescendientes y los derechos de las mujeres afrodescendientes. La población afrodescendiente representa en general en el continente y en el Caribe más de una tercera parte. Estamos hablando de 200 millones de personas, más de 200 millones de personas. Y sin embargo, en la mayoría de países de la región no existen datos desagregados por etnia y raza en los registros epidemiológicos que permitan conocer el impacto real que ha tenido el COVID-19 en las poblaciones afrodescendientes. Escasamente conocemos los datos por etnia, por género, pero no poseemos datos desagregados por raza. Y esto es un problema seriosísimo que nos pone en cuenta lo que ha sido la historia de la recabación de información epidemiológica para las personas afrodescendientes. Pero sí sabemos, los datos y las comunidades nos lo plantean permanentemente, que en América Latina la afección ha sido dramática en las comunidades afrodescendientes. También sabemos que las personas afrodescendientes se convierten en una de las poblaciones más vulnerables por 3 razones. Primero, porque presentan las enfermedades crónicas que agudizan la complejidad de la enfermedad. Segundo, porque están en condición de exclusión económica. Y tercero, porque muchas de las comunidades se encuentran lejos de los centros de salud y de los centros urbanos. La población afrodescendiente además tiene los niveles de desempleo más altos en América Latina. Y si el comportamiento que tenemos va a ser es el comportamiento de mi país, donde el desempleo ha aumentado en 3 meses, ha aumentado para las mujeres 10 puntos porcentuales, para la población general ha aumentado más de 5 puntos porcentuales. En Costa Rica tenemos hoy un desempleo femenino de 26%, dato que con toda certeza es mayor para las mujeres afrodescendientes, al igual que sabemos que el embarazo adolescente en toda la región afecta sustantivamente a nuestras jóvenes afrodescendientes y que la pandemia agudiza muchísimo más la posibilidad de acceder a los servicios de salud sexual y reproductiva, poniendo en riesgo una vez más y agudizando esta situación que viven las mujeres y las jóvenes afrodescendientes. Las personas afrodescendientes, por lo tanto, están siendo desproporcionadamente afectadas por las crisis, por la crisis del COVID-19 y por políticas que no tienen una perspectiva de etnia y raza. Costa Rica es uno, creo que de los pocos países que sacó unos lineamientos relacionados con para las personas afrodescendientes, y quiero decir que no hemos reportado de las 66 muertes que tenemos reportadas de COVID-19, no tenemos todavía reportada ninguna muerte de persona afrodescendiente, pero hay unos lineamientos, hay unos objetivos claros que los impulsamos desde la vicepresidencia con el comisionado de pueblos afrodescendientes. Debemos enfatizar que la desigualdad es uno de los elementos cruciales que afectan a las poblaciones afrodescendientes en los momentos de la pandemia y que hay un aumento desproporcionado de violencia hacia las mujeres y niñas afrodescendientes debido al confinamiento. Pero también, y quería realmente resaltar las palabras de Linda, que en este momento estamos viviendo 2 realidades. Nunca antes en la historia habíamos tenido un debate global relacionado con los temas del racismo y la discriminación como en este momento. Los debates sobre racismo siempre estuvieron, a excepción de las conferencias mundiales sobre el racismo, siempre estuvieron contenidos al interno de nuestros países. Y hoy el movimiento de Black Lives Matter, la brutal muerte de George Floyd, ha puesto al mundo por primera vez a debatir sobre los temas de racismo y discriminación racial. Yo quiero celebrar que el gobierno de Costa Rica, en su consejo de gobierno, donde están todos los ministros, ministras y autoridades máximas, tomamos una decisión no solamente para solidarizarnos con el pueblo afroamericano, sino para asumir un compromiso absoluto de lucha frontal contra el racismo y la discriminación, tanto en Costa Rica como a nivel global. Y que recientemente los presidentes de los supremos poderes están firmando, y esto quiero decir, el Poder Ejecutivo, el Congreso de la República, el Poder Judicial, están firmando un compromiso sobre la erradicación del racismo y la discriminación racial. Quiero ir terminando planteando algunas cosas. ¿Cuáles son los principales desafíos? Primero quisiera decir que no me cabe la menor duda que estamos pariendo una nueva generación, que hoy las comunidades afrodescendientes están mucho menos solas en la lucha contra el racismo y la discriminación, que nos sentimos realmente sorprendidos cada vez más cuando no solamente las personas negras están levantando la lucha contra el racismo, sino cada vez más personas jóvenes de todo el mundo, hombres y mujeres no negros, entienden que el genocidio hacia las comunidades negras debe de acabar de una sola vez. Dos, tenemos que impulsar desde los organismos internacionales, y me parece que Natalia, como subsecretaria general de las Naciones Unidas, es nuestra mejor aliada, lineamientos claros y concretos en materia de COVID-19 y afrodescendientes, pero principalmente en todos aquellos temas que tendrán que ver con la habilitación económica, para que no nos sigamos quedando atrás, sino para que hayan recursos, oportunidades, para que de verdad podamos hacer alianzas para efectivamente tener unas instituciones que no solo nos faciliten los derechos, la posibilidad de conocer nuestros derechos, sino de concretarlos, y que los sistemas de salud empiecen a tener los datos desagregados en materia de raza y etnia, porque es la única manera de confrontar pandemias. Lo segundo es que tenemos que seguir fortaleciendo este movimiento internacional con altas autoridades, y ahí el liderazgo del Fondo de Población es impresionante para levantar el tono sobre los derechos de las mujeres y pueblos afrodescendientes. Esto es ya en América Latina. Yo quiero agradecer que el Consenso de Montevideo es una herramienta fundamental para levantar esta agenda, y que ubiquemos aliados en el sector privado, aliados en los estados, la alianza con las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, pensando fundamentalmente en las niñas y niños afrodescendientes y en esas niñas por las cuales tenemos que cerrar las brechas. Y quisiera hacer una invitación a todas las mujeres afrodescendientes para que el 25 de julio nos pongamos, reivindiquemos y nos sintamos orgullosas de ser afrodescendientes, y que nos pongamos un turbante como una manera de reivindicar nuestra cultura, y compartamos internacionalmente con el hashtag orgullosamente afrodescendiente, orgullosamente negra. El camino que tenemos es extraordinario si lo hacemos juntas y juntos para enfrentar los desafíos que hoy nos da el COVID-19. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Excellency Epsi Campbell-Barr. Data are meaningful, and we've seen how it's been used against us in this country. Now I'd like to get to our panelists and questions. The first question goes to His Excellency Ambassador Walton A. Webson. Ambassador, you've said throughout your life, you've tried to give voice to people and places and concerns that otherwise might not be heard. And you've led efforts to establish equal rights in school for children with visual impairments across the Caribbean and Latin America. Multilateral and specifically intergovernmental spaces have an important responsibility in setting global policy that guides governments, multi-sectoral actions to fulfill human rights for all. Considering the history of slavery, colonization, marginalization, and continuous injustice faced by people of African descent, what role do you see CARICOM playing at the United Nations and beyond to advance the human rights and ensure equality for people of African descent?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Dr. Kanem, it's always so good to be either on stage or on screen with you. Thank you for inviting me. Excellency, Madam.
Ambassador,
the host has asked me to start my video, so I'm going to do that now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're visible now. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, sorry. Madam Vice President, we met very briefly a few years ago in your lovely country when I attended a meeting speaking with young girls with disabilities, and your presentation to that meeting has remained with me, and it's very good to be with you once again, this time on screen. And Mr. Taylor, thank you for your very interesting and thoughtful poem. I actually grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and and the new school is my alma mater, so it's really good to hear you. Thank you so much. And to the rest of this distinguished audience and distinguished members of the panel, it's my great honor to be part of this. I begin with a quote from James Baldwin. Baldwin said, "To accept one's past, one's history, is not the same thing as drowning in it. It is learning how to use it. An invented past," he says, "can never be used. It cracks and crumbles under the pressure of life like clay in the season of drought." I think that's an appropriate quote for the times that we live in, where we are seeing pressures in the changes that people of African descent are asking for in society, and pressures that COVID-19 have brought upon the established systems in society. We are seeing those pressures, and we are understanding for people of African descent, who we know not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but in North America, in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, are carrying the burden of as victims of COVID-19 greatest. The significant legacy of colonialism on peoples of the Caribbean that have left major scars in our health sectors, in our social development, etc. We have left those scars that have left us, and therefore I am getting constant messages as to how I should situate myself. So I'm sorry, it's kind of, okay. I trust this is.
That's perfect, yes.
Okay. Is that fine?
Yeah, you're fine, yes.
Okay. Okay. So those scars have left us. Colonialism is the baggage of colonialism, therefore, has left psychological and a major scars in the social development within our societies. Our women in the Caribbean, we have heads of female-headed households where our children, from slavery to colonialism to post-colonialism, have seen the single woman household as the leader in our societies, have created such scars that today we still bear them as we try to get young girls and young boys in our society to re-examine the societies that we want, and to not to live with the pressures of the past. I think it is important, though, that we understand a few things where we have learned from, and see, and changes must come. The Caribbean community is working hard at the United Nations with colleagues from Africa in a number of ways that is beginning to address some of these changes. COVID-19 has thrown up major issues around supply chain. And we have seen where those supply chains reaching out into what is called the developed countries have left us behind, have left us in need, have left pressures on our societies. We have to begin to open up closer channels to respond to issues like the pandemic in which we live. We must begin to work together with Africa and with Latin America so that we can we can bring things like supply chain mechanism closer. The CARICOM community in the United Nations, speaking to the broader United Nations system and the agencies, are not failing to bring this message home. We believe very strongly that we must find ways to bring not only health supply chains, but the supply chains for economic and social development closer. We recognize the problems we face with financial challenges, again, that are now showing up even greater as a result. And we are joining forces with African colleagues and brothers and sisters in order to begin to make a stronger union to address these challenges. Let me also speak about one issue that few people wish to speak about, but is gaining some traction: reparation. The relics of slavery and the disasters of colonialism has never been truly accounted for. And I say that without any apology. We must begin to address the relics of slavery and the disasters of colonialism in a real way. The Caribbean community and Africa, joined with brothers and sisters from Latin America, are the only groups that is going to bring the world's attention to this. The CARICOM community has established for several years now a reparation committee. That committee is leading the way and leading the world in bringing attention to bear in the highest of places. The CARICOM and African communities in the United Nations must now and will address. The CARICOM community has given a mandate to the CARICOM ambassadors to look into this. The heads of government have done this. And the Caribbean community, therefore, working with the African partners, are beginning to speak together to form such a caucus so that we can bring this matter to the attention of the highest level within the United Nations system. Reparation must be something that we must address. We have not defined how, but we must find a way together with our brothers and sisters across the United States and beyond, and our brothers and sisters in Latin America to begin to bring international pressure on the need for addressing the question of reparation. These are important matters, and we believe that the community of CARICOM and the international could lead the international community in reaching out to begin to find ways to address these issues. In closing, let me mention two things of concern. The international pressures that we are seeing as a result of George Floyd's passing, unfortunate and very, very unfortunate passing, and in the manner so that it was so done, is another milestone in our efforts towards bringing international attention to the plight of Black people within the global community. But I become concerned when the call for Black Lives Matters becomes more of a fad than an actual than a call for action. We must not allow it. I am very keen in participating and following sports. And every time I follow a soccer game, a football game in Europe this for the last month, the teams take the knee. Take the knee has become more of a, instead of the seriousness of what that means, has become a fad. We cannot allow that. Baldwin said, the meaning of liberal. He said, those who think they know more about you than you know yourself. We cannot allow the slogans that are used as a call for action to become everyday fads. We have seen sportsmen and sportswomen lose their medals because they stood for Black power. We have seen people, sportsmen and sportswomen, lose their titles because they stood for what was right. We cannot allow the call for actions to become an everyday fad. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Webson. Thank you. So I'd like to bring on our next panelist, Shoneida Lowe. As a young person of African descent, you've engaged in advocacy to ensure equal rights and opportunities for young people of African descent in Guyana. How can other people like you contribute to bring about the end of racism and discrimination?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
It's an absolute pleasure to join you all from Guyana to make my contributions to this very timely but necessary discussion. I just want to start by creating a general context of exactly what racism looks like in Guyana. So I'll begin with a brief story where a Guyanese mother was very late for work one morning, and her son took 1 extra hour in the bathroom, 1 hour longer than he really should have. And so she was a bit worried, and she's like, you know, why is he taking so long? It's just a shower. So she went into the bathroom and she said, son, why are you taking so long to shower? So he responded to say, mommy, my classmate said to me that I am dirty. And so I'm trying to, you know, try to be clean. So the mother said, but you're dirty how? He said, my skin is black, mommy. My skin is black, it's dirty. And this story resonated with me and really paints the picture of the way persons of African descent are seen, not only in Guyana, but in many other countries globally. So Guyana, like many other countries, is currently struggling with systems that have been put in place to perpetuate racism. We currently have an ethnic makeup of 39.8% persons of Indian descent, 29.3% persons of African descent, 19.9% mixed race, and 10.5% indigenous people. Presently, persons of African descent in Guyana continue to be disenfranchised, even though our ancestors, under inhumane conditions, built this country before any other race had inhabited our lands. It's therefore saddening to think that after all of their struggles and sacrifices, that society has still managed to keep us marginalized and deprived of our access to equitable opportunities. In Guyana, we often hear this is me speaking in our Creole dialect, Black people can't do business. Black people like working for other people. However, all of these notions are untrue and should be dismissed. There is a prevailing thought that Afro-Guyanese prefer the public service and working for others, while Indo-Guyanese prefer farming and entrepreneurship. There is some historical significance that underpins that stereotype, however, as post-enslavement, many Afro-Guyanese parents struggled to educate their children who became the healthcare, education, and public service backbone of our country. But the notion that there has not always been a thriving entrepreneurial class among Afro-Guyanese is just simply wrong. In fact, that entrepreneurial spirit is still among our Afro-Guyanese and survives even today. A study was done in Guyana that really tried to do a comparison between both East Indian and Afro-Guyanese businesses, which started roughly at the same rate. And what that study revealed was that Indo-Guyanese businesses are larger, they're more established, they generate more revenue, which are all factors that point to capital and more business support available to East Indian entrepreneurs. To reduce the development of these inequalities, however, I firmly believe that we need to give consideration to the following areas. The first being a re-education of our population. It's important to note that the genesis of this issue is staggered in the miseducation of persons who hold very thwarted and false ideologies in their perceptions of race. Let us start by noting that no one wants to think of themselves as a racist. In fact, most racists justify their snide injustices and remarks by using frequently used terms like, I have Black friends. However, racism was and still is being taught in households most times, which of course is the first institution of learning, which allows racism to be interwoven into families and, most importantly, children in the same manner in which they learn their everyday mannerisms and daily graces. It is therefore no surprise to me that these said persons walk around and treat racism like the new normal. At this time in our history, it is important that young people acknowledge the importance of re-educating persons, beginning with learning and teaching of minorities' history, specifically in this context, African history. Matuma once said in his briefing to the Geneva-based Human Rights Council that education, and I quote, education has a central role in creating new values, attitudes that provide us with important tools for addressing deep-rooted discrimination and the legacy of historical injustices. He further compounded that we must ensure that our school curricula contains balanced information on the contribution of minorities, migrants, and other non-dominant groups, and emphasized that this is particularly relevant against a background of economic and social unrest. So my second point from that is to begin our work at the level of the community. And I cannot stop reinforcing and saying this all the time. Starting at the community level is a concept that is very practical, but oftentimes it's usually overlooked. However, it could be used as the most powerful tool. Most of us as youth have greater influences in our communities. And when I speak about our community, I know I not only refer to the environs in which we live, but also our churches, our universities, any space that we occupy that we can create change or advocate for better for persons of African descent. So this could also be done in the form of creating safe spaces within those communities for persons who have been affected by racism, as well as persons who are perpetrators of racism, have acknowledged this and actually need help. There's a quote that one said, and this is a quote that we always say in Guyana, that individuals build communities, communities build regions, and regions help to build nations. And the only way to start this is at the grassroots level of our community. And even Martin Luther King, we can look back to him, who was perhaps the most famous civil rights activist against racism in the US. He actually advocated for protests at the grassroots level, and he believed in organizing at the community level since he understood how powerful and effective this is.
I'm going to stop you there. We're going to come back to this. We're running a little bit behind. And so I'm going to come back to this in that next round of questions. Thank you very much. I want to bring up our next speaker, Dr. Ahmed Reed. Dr. Reed, we are at the 5-year mark of the International Decade for People of African Descent, and you and your colleagues have been working tirelessly to raise awareness of the inequalities, marginalization, and discrimination faced by people of African descent across the globe. COVID-19 has further exacerbated these inequalities. Can you discuss how COVID-19 has impacted communities of African descent globally?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to my fellow panelists and to Dr. Kanem, UNFP, for the invitation. Excellencies, friends, this is a very timely discussion that we are having, and from the vantage point of the working group, COVID-19 has laid bare deep-seated racial, class, and structural inequalities in countries across the globe. Studies after studies are now highlighting the grave toll COVID-19 is taking on Black communities. In Britain, Blacks are twice as likely to die from the virus, while in the United States, a disproportionate number of deaths are African Americans. In cities across the Americas, the human toll and devastation is shocking to the core. It seems that wherever one turns, COVID-19 is posing an existential threat to the lives and dignity of Black people. The impact that race and class is playing during the current pandemic is nothing new. A brief look at the history of pandemics shows that structural discrimination and the pervasive nature of racism meant that Blacks, and especially those from the working class, have always been disproportionately impacted. The truth, though, is that there has been a steady erosion globally of commitment to the anti-racism human rights framework, including to the historic commitments to combat structural forms of discrimination and intolerance made at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban in 2001. So what we see in the working group is that the pervasive nature of structural discrimination faced by people of African descent is reflected in the disparities in education, employment, housing, health, and adequate standard of living. So I'll focus on just two broad areas here today. One is that there are several underlying health conditions that enhance risk and vulnerability disproportionately that exist among people of African descent, including hypertension, cardiovascular disease, lupus, autoimmune disorders, and the impacts of chronic racial stress. What we see is that the intersections of race with gender, disability, class, sexual orientation, and gender identity further add to these complexities. The disproportionate presence, therefore, of people of African descent in refugee camps, in jails and prisons, and in areas under the care and custody of the state presents a particular risk due to poor living conditions or conditions of confinement. Lacking freedom of movement, access to resources, and decision-making power, the most at-risk populations are vulnerable to mitigate risk. The use of incarcerated people, as we have seen here in the United States, to produce equipment for the pandemic response, to dig graves, or for other means without adequate protection against risk or vulnerability, and at substantial cost to states, is exploitative of people of African descent and reflect ongoing institutional racism. Furthermore, the disproportionate representation of people of African descent in the service industries, which is overrepresented by women, is also a source of risk and vulnerability. Widespread self-quarantine, physical distancing, and health mandates are heavily underwritten by the ongoing availability of a workforce that enables millions of people to reduce transmission by staying at home. In many states, people of African descent disproportionately serve as home health aides, carers, and grocery and delivery personnel who help hospitals and healthcare systems focus on the most serious cases, despite no public efforts to ensure their safety and protection. They also represent important lifelines for the economy, yet there is little public effort to ensure their workplace safety, access to protective gear, or stability. In this respect, the treatment of people of African descent serving in this crisis as disposable recalls historical exploitation and implies a social mindset that may fail to critically analyze the assumptions it makes about the needs and the risks of people of African descent in this crisis. So just in closing, because I know my time is going, what we are recommending as a working group is that states must, and it's been mentioned before, states must collect robust data disaggregated by race, and they must use this data to identify racial disparities and mitigate racial discrimination in all sectors, health, education, and so forth. In addition, states have not heeded the calls for reparation. I know Ambassador Webster spoke eloquently about this earlier, which include the need to dismantle contemporary structures of racial injustice that are legacies of historical injustice. A reflective and reasoned discourse on the matter of reparation should form an essential part of the process underway for finding solutions. So too should be the program of activities associated with the International Decade for People of African Descent, and also the importance of the need to have a permanent forum where people of African descent worldwide can meet and discuss issues and matters of importance to them. And the more I listen to the presentation, I'll just close with the words of His Excellency Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. And his words were immortalized by Bob Marley in a song titled War. It's not that we're advocating war, but it shows the importance of the fight ahead and the need. And I'll just talk with the opening stanza. It says, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, he says, everywhere there is war. We're not advocating war, but we're saying that we need to take these matters seriously. And as we think about the 2030 agenda in particular, one, and I say this in other fora, that the 2030 agenda will not be achieved until we tackle systemic discrimination or structural discrimination and systemic racism. In countries after countries that we have visited, member states, we say to us in meetings, listen, we do not collect disaggregated data. So if you're not, and I'll say this in other time, if you're not counted, you do not count. And that's what it simply means in all of this. So while we embrace the 2030 agenda, we have to move forward with some measure of seriousness in tackling structural discrimination, systemic racism, because these are challenges. SDG 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 10, and pretty much all the other SDGs are intersected, they're cross-connected. And if a young woman of African descent is facing discrimination, then we will not eliminate SDG 10, which is inequality within countries. Right. And you see the cross-cutting nature and the interconnected nature of all these SDGs. So attacking them one by one is important, but we have to look at it as a holistic set of goals and targets. And therefore, structural discrimination is posing a fundamental threat at this point to the achievement and attainment of the SDGs. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful listening to the presenters so far. I'm looking forward to the other presenters. It's an important and timely topic. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Reed.
Thank you.
And now for our last panelist, Dr. Alexandra da Silva. Brazil is facing one of the largest COVID-19 crises in the world. Historically, people of African descent in Brazil have been marginalized and discriminated against. What are some of the barriers they are facing to access to medical services, including COVID-19 testing, continuous access to sexual and reproductive health for women and girls, mental health, as well as other social benefits they need to effectively protect themselves, their families, and their communities? Dr. da Silva?
Bom dia, todos e todos, Dr. Kanem, Linda, excelentíssima Epsi e colegas panelistas. Eu quero primeiramente fazer um contexto que no Brasil nós já ultrapassamos 81 mil mortes e os afrodescendentes de pele mais escura têm mais risco de morrer pela Covid, seguidos pelos afrodescendentes de pele mais clara, chamado de pardos aqui no Brasil, se comparados aos brancos. E atualmente a Covid avança para as cidades do interior. No Brasil, um afrodescendente sem escolaridade tem 3,8 vezes mais chances de morrer pela Covid se comparado a um branco, uma pessoa branca de nível superior. As barreiras que nós encontramos hoje para o enfrentamento à Covid diz respeito à redução da atenção primária, a redução de profissionais de saúde, em destaque para os agentes comunitários de saúde que participam da estratégia de saúde da família. Há também a falta de acompanhamento e da busca ativa das pessoas afrodescendentes que possuem as comorbidades que pioram o avanço, que pioram o quadro da Covid, incluindo anemia falciforme, além de hipertensão, diabetes, DPOC e obesidade. Há também a falta dos testes de diagnóstico para a Covid nos territórios negros, que são os locais onde residem mais pessoas afrodescendentes. E também, como já foi falado, a falta de informações agregadas por raça-cor, que nos ajudaria no melhor enfrentamento ou assertividade das ações para a Covid. Nos hospitais, há uma insuficiência de recursos físicos e humanos, e agora também falta de EPIs e hospitais públicos que atendem, na sua maior parte, a população afrodescendente. Há o adoecimento de profissionais de saúde, e aqui eu quero destacar a equipe de enfermagem, composta majoritariamente por mulheres afrodescendentes, numa função de técnico auxiliar de enfermagem. Na questão da saúde sexual e reprodutiva, 77% do óbito de gestantes pela Covid, todos esses casos ocorrem no Brasil, e uma das causas é a disparidade racial presente aqui. Há também um desrespeito para as condições salutares para a maternidade, para o exercício, o usufruto da maternidade de mulheres afrodescendentes no Brasil. Muitas delas têm sido convocadas para voltar ao trabalho sem ter condições locais para deixar seus filhos, sejam em creches ou escolas, e também a dificuldade para auxiliar nos estudos em casa, dado que muitas delas têm baixa escolaridade. E, além disso, o Brasil também enfrenta a morte de crianças causadas pela polícia. Há também uma dificuldade que envolve o fechamento de algumas unidades de atenção básica e uma reordenação da assistência para o enfrentamento à Covid, que aumenta o risco de gestantes e de muitas mulheres que podem ter gravidez não intencionais, o aumento das infecções sexualmente transmissíveis, do aborto inseguro e também de mortalidade materna. E vale destacar que o Brasil, historicamente, tem um percentual maior de violência contra as mulheres negras, que nesse momento de confinamento, isolamento e distanciamento, aumenta a sua frequência, a sua incidência. Quanto à saúde mental, seguindo até o conceito do professor David Williams, nós temos uma dificuldade para o exercício de algumas atividades informais, que são mais comuns nas pessoas afrodescendentes, e isso vai culminar no aumento de mais crianças em situação de pobreza, as atividades escolares que demandam o uso de internet, acompanhamento de adultos. Há também o aumento dos gastos mensais das famílias. No Brasil, os povos descendentes dos povos que foram escravizados aqui, chamados de quilombolas, essas pessoas estão passando por seríssimos problemas que envolvem falta de água e acesso a alimentos essenciais, e também um isolamento das pessoas privadas de liberdade que estão nas cadeias, porque agora houve uma redução também das visitas familiares. Em relação aos benefícios que são concedidos pelo governo, um benefício emergencial, principalmente de pandemia, há muita dificuldade de acesso das pessoas afrodescendentes e também um aumento da violência das crianças e das idosas, das pessoas idosas negras. Já tem dados dizendo que no Brasil o aumento contra a pessoa idosa aumentou em 500%, e há uma dificuldade da notificação ou denúncia de crianças afrodescendentes e idosos afrodescendentes, porque muitas vezes essas pessoas residem com um agressor. Essa seria a minha contribuição para esse primeiro momento. Tentei respeitar o tempo proposto.
Thank you so much, Dr. De Silva.
Excelente. Obrigada.
Thank you. We're running a bit behind, but Vice President Epsi Campbell-Barr, if you could give us 1 minute of kind of your final thoughts before we introduce our musical guest, that would be wonderful.
Realmente nada más agradecer y volver a decirle a Natalia y a todas las personas que nos acompañan, a usted, Linda, gracias. Tenemos que hacer un trabajo conjunto todos los días más fuerte que el día anterior, porque la gente nuestra está esperando del esfuerzo que nosotras impulsemos conjuntamente. Y eso es en todo el continente y en todo el Caribe. De manera que cuentan conmigo. Esta es un compromiso no solo personal, sino un compromiso del gobierno de Costa Rica para que avancemos de manera decidida para disminuir las brechas de desigualdad para los pueblos afrodescendientes y para que la nueva realidad y la realidad actual del COVID-19 no siga impactando de manera tan dramática a los pueblos afrodescendientes. Tenemos que seguir generando alianzas y trabajo conjunto. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to bring Mr. Mark Johnson on and a performance of Playing for Change.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to say, first of all, what an incredible honor it is to be here, hearing all of these amazing discussions and such inspiring people. My name is Mark Johnson, the co-founder of a music project called Playing for Change. Playing for Change was born out of the idea that no matter how many things in life divide us, they're never going to be as strong as the power of music to bring us back together. Music is the one thing that transcends all of the things in life that divide us. And when the music plays, we feel connected, no matter where we come from, no matter who we are. The thing about Playing for Change is that by traveling around the world, we've been able to learn that music helps us reinvent how we see the world. We get to see the world through the lens of music. We get to see culture. We get to see how people create their identity. And through this process of traveling the world, recording and filming musicians, it's been an amazing opportunity to understand that music was invented for this purpose. There's never been a better time in history than to use the power of music to unite us. In music, as in life, the things that divide us, they disappear when we feel connected to each other. And also the things that make us different, they make us stronger. And that to me became the guiding principle of Playing for Change. I would like to thank Alvaro Serrano for inviting me today in the United Nations Population Fund. We've been working together for many years to use music as a tool to reinvent and reconnect hearts all over the world and reinvent how people see the world. By creating music and uniting people all over the world, we create songs around the world with Playing for Change. And then we also connect children all over the world through music, art, and dance schools. And when you do this, you see that joy is intrinsic in every society. And we can use music as the best tool we have to bring people together, to inspire everybody to care more about each other. And that's why we're very excited to partner with the United Nations Population Fund. We're going to be creating a global music event this fall to sing, dance, and to play for racial justice. And it's an incredible honor for all of us involved with Playing for Change to be included in this event. I know that together we can make people care more about each other, and we can unite together back to the one group we're all a part of, the human race. And now I would love to introduce a video that Playing for Change created. This is a song from Angola, and it's a song around the world called Pembalaka. And it gives you a little insight into the power of music to bring us all together. And thank you so much.
Wayane, oyo pemba, o pemba, pemba laka, o laka laka zinze, mwayo monzo, o monzo monzo makube, makube mushi, o mushi mushi ngatu, o ngatu ngati mene mene kyo suku, o suku suku tea, o tea tea gamba jama ngolo kiri, o kiri kiri sua, o sua sua kungu, o kungu kungu bete, o bete bete kiama, o kiama kiama longwe, kimene kitelemwa, o kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe. Guayane, oyo pemba, o pemba pemba laka, o laka laka simple, mayo bonzo, o bonzo bonzo makube makube mushi, o mushi mushi gato, o gato gati mene mene ke suku, o suku suku tea, o tea tea kama yama kama jamata, o mata mata bora, o bolo 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 pijama bolo shana bolo bolo, o bolo bolo kiri, o kiri kiri sua, o sua sua kungu, o kungu kungu bete, o bete bete kiama, o kiama kiama longwe, kitele kitele mwa, o kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe. Guayane, oyo pemba, o pemba pemba laka, o laka laka sinte, mayo bonzo, o bonzo bonzo makube makube mushi, o mushi mushi ngadu, o ngadu ngadu mene mene ke suku, o suku suku tea, o tea tea kama yama kama jamaka, o mata mata bolo, o bolo 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 kinama bolo shana bolo bolo, o bolo bolo kiri, o kiri kiri sua, o sua sua kungu, o kungu kungu bete, o bete bete kiama, o kiama kiama longwe, kimene kitelemwa, o kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe, kimate supe supe.
Wow, that was wonderful. Thank you. Music is a universal language.
Yes, that's for sure. You can feel it.
You can. So now I'd like to turn this back over to Dr. Natalia Kanem to close us out.
Well, brilliant. I'm just going to ask Haroldo Robinson, who is our Regional Director, UNFPA for Latin America and the Caribbean, to give us some thoughts. What have you seen here and what's inspired you today, Harold?
Well, thank you, Natalia. Well, what inspires me today is to see that there's a commitment, a strong commitment to address the inequalities of this region and actually around the world in terms of the Afro-descendants. And actually, this is very timely because under the leadership of yourself, Executive Director, UNFPA has put together a strong programmatic framework that includes 3 pillars. 1, data and statistical visibility, aiming at improving the availability of disaggregated data, information, and also evidence so that they could be decisions. First of all, an assessment of the situation, a real assessment of the situation of Afro-descendants that can lead to policies and programs targeting those structural inequalities. This program also has a component on empowerment and amplifying the voices of Afro-descendants groups, particularly women, adolescents, girls, and young people, so that they themselves can get involved and at the same time be part of the solutions and be a valid interlocutor to the states and intergovernmental fora. Finally, UNFPA wants to make Afro-descendants in Latin America certainly the focus of our programmatic efforts to achieve our 300 maternal death, zero unmet need for family planning, and zero gender-based violence and harmful practices, with a special focus on the Afro-descendants in the States, because that's a context that is very particular and very vulnerable. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Over to you, Madam Edie.
I'm unmuting. Thanks very much, Harold, and also Linda for sort of skillfully moving us through a lot of material. I'm so delighted that we've had poetry and music as part of this commitment. In 2019, when people of African descent met in Costa Rica under the leadership of Vice President F.C. Campbell, 9 countries signed on to a declaration. This Costa Rica declaration, we think, is the nucleus of commitments that governments and others can take towards full human rights for people of African descent, and in particular, youth, women, girls. Now, at the historic Nairobi Summit on ICPD at Cairo +25 last year, together with the government of Costa Rica, with civil society, the World Bank, so many others, including the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we have a big ally in Dr. Michelle Bachelet, who, as you know, is the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. As part of the larger Afrodescendiente community from all over the world, we committed to this action that will close the gaps and address the challenges that are being faced by people of African descent. And I believe that we can build on this tremendous momentum. I've been very excited to see comments in the chat room from so many different parts of the world, all assuring ourselves that we can do things and that we should not sit by and be passive. So standing up for human rights right now, it's a moment to do that in the realm of health. Health is part of the dignity of the human being. It's also part of the unattended well-being of people of African descent over years and centuries. So ahora y en el futuro, I would like to see us all strategizing, joining coalitions, and even in neighborhoods, as Mervyn Taylor pointed out, there's always that woman who is the good shepherd, who is going to be able to turn the tide and make a difference, make things right. So at UNFPA, our commitment is unwavering. We are proud to join you in this action to dismantle the social oppression, and to do that immediately. We've waited and waited. We shall overcome has been sung for decades now, and we want to see action, and we want to see it in a timely way, and we will not back down until it's done once and for all. So let's continue to advance the goals during this International Decade for People of African Descent. As Mark Johnson alluded to, we will be putting out a call for musicians and drummers in particular to join UNFPA in a drum dialogue that is going to clear the air in so many segments of society to discuss the very vital issues that will ensure people of African descent, and in fact, all vulnerable people around the world, equal access to health, whether we're talking about a vaccine or whether we're talking about the reception that we receive when we arrive in the emergency room, the priority reasoning, that equation that goes through the person's mind. How important is this human being? We're all equal in importance and in dignity. So let me close by saying that in this last 5 years of this International Decade for People of African Descent, UNFPA is happy to join with you to redouble efforts to assure that every 10-year-old girl everywhere will have a bright and healthy future, that nothing will be done to her against her will. And here I'm speaking about early marriage and female genital mutilation and the preference for sons over daughters. And let us ensure that there is peace in her home, in her community. The professor already alluded to the need to silence the guns. We won't stop until this job is done. And please remember that what I am asking you to do is to step up, to be on the record, to defend your sister, your daughter, your mother, the girl next door, from anything that might lead to needless suffering. Marcus Garvey also said, "Up, ye mighty race. You can accomplish what you will." And the path of that common will is clear: to uphold dignity, to restore justice, to ensure safety, and to build equality. We call on our partners and our allies to join hands with us and to commit to doing that, to speaking up, to doing better, to being part of the solution. Thank you very much for being part of this global conversation. I would absolutely like to thank the wonderful panel and indeed the wonderful moderator, Linda Goler-Brount from the Black Women's Health Imperative, and to all of you for making the commitment to be the person who is willing to make a difference. Thank you very much. Adelante. Gracias. Muchas obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes our conversation today. Thank you, Dr. Kanem, Vice President Epsie Campbell, Ambassador Webson, our esteemed panel, and thank you for all of you who participated. And let me just add my invitation to Dr. Kanem's to support the work of the International Decade for People of African Descent and UNFPA's contributions to that agenda. Be well and be safe.
Thank you.